I spend most of my days thinking about the things that most users, in this case customers or regular end users, never see. I don't build features that customers click. I build the systems engineers rely on to make those features possible. CI pipelines, internal platforms, developer tooling, basically the invisible infrastructure behind the apps that we use every day. And here's the interesting part. Of all the things I've learned in working in one of the most complex fields in the world, that is distributed systems, cloud infrastructure, and automation at scale, the most important lesson I've learned isn't anything to do with making things more complex. It's about making them simpler. The honest truth is, I didn't start out trying to make things simpler. I learned that lesson the hard way, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Turning complexity into simplicity. And these are just lessons from my career in software engineering, platform engineering, or whatever you. And so we've got two things, right? It's complexity, complex systems, pipelines, your infrastructure code, whatever you name it, and then simplicity. And this is the entire premise of the talk. And I know it sounds like a bit of a paradox. How does someone who build complex systems for a living, distributed systems, pipelines, YAML files that seem to have a mind of their own, even thinking and dreaming in YAML sometimes, how does someone like that, learn a lesson that's not about handling more complexity, but more about simplicity? And why was it the hardest thing for me to learn? Now, when I started out building tooling for the developers, I was excited. For me, it was the opportunity to show my technical chops to other developers. And I felt like I was building for an audience that would really appreciate, they're developers too, that would really appreciate, the complexity of a solution. And so what I did was I added flexible abstractions, powerful configuration options, and a dozen different flags that, let engineers customize everything. And my honest belief at the time was, if it's elegant and well designed, engineers will love it. As I'm sure some of you have guessed, that assumption was wrong. And the first turning point for me, where it became obvious that this wasn't the way to go, was failure of adoption. Internally, it was a masterpiece. Externally, adoption was a nightmare. No one wanted to use the tool I built. And I started asking myself questions. Why? And it turns out engineers don't want to learn another system. Many of us are comfortable with what we already know. Many times we don't want to read documentation. They just wanted to push code, run tests, move on with their day. That was it. Push code, run tests, and move on with their day. And then something clicked for me. Great engineering does not automatically mean a great product. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. Great engineering does not translate to a great product. So what makes a great product? I realized engineers are users like every other person, and they prefer simple tools. We all gravitate naturally towards simpler things. If it's simple, it's easy to adopt. That originally surprised me. And I need to make the distinction that simple does not mean unsophisticated. Simple in this context means focused, opinionated, designed to do the right thing, and which is also the easy thing, right? And so, I began to change how I thought about the problem. And one concrete example, one of the biggest shifts for me at the organization I work at right now came when there was a problem and we introduced pipeline templates. Before templates, every team wired pipelines from scratch, secret environment variables, deploy logic, often copied from old projects, and with opinionated templates and sensible defaults, the setup time dropped, right? From hours to minutes. Deployments became predictable and onboarding stopped being painful. This wasn't technical brilliance. That's not what was happening here. It was product thinking, beginning to think of the problem from a product perspective. And, I believe if you want to give it a term, product-led engineering. And that was a mindset shift that needed to happen for me and the rest of my team. I started following advice from builders like Tony Fadell, who designed, and built the iPhone, the iPod, amongst a few other things. And it was built for the customer. Always built for the customer, right? And in my case, the customer was other engineers, right? And that changed how I built everything. It's changed how I currently think about problems and even approach the solutions I'm trying to build for new problems. I stopped asking how flexible can this be? How technically brilliant can this be? And started asking, how is this easy to succeed with? Does this solve the problem? Can they use it easily without a very steep climb, a steep learning curve? And I now approach this from a practical framework standpoint. There are 4 simple rules I follow, amongst a few others. And the first thing is defaults, big configuration. Good defaults accelerate teams. Be opinionated where you can be, and let engineers only bother about the very specific fine-tuning, which directly translates to reducing the surface area. And because every option is a cognitive task, it's something someone has to think about, has to figure out, and start measuring real outcomes. Trying to first successful build matters. You don't have to build something perfect to begin with. Release an MVP, get people working on it, and then lastly, take feedback, right? And feedback is the most valuable thing. You find that once you're able to use a tool, many engineers are always happy to go, I think you can do this better, and this, and this. And, simplicity basically means being opinionated. It replaces uncertainty, and, that helps, build trust and make things build faster. And, as I conclude right now, I just want to mention that turning complexity into simplicity isn't necessarily about removing power. It's about moving power to the right place. And when we do that, we give engineers back their most valuable resource, which is time. Thank you.